Hi, welcome to this series that we're calling Sustainability Bytes. I'm Kevin O'Grady of Pinnacle Quality, and I've been working in sustainability for over 20 years, especially working with things like the Forest Stewardship Council and the Alliance for Water Stewardship. And what we're doing in this series is giving you bite-sized bits of information about key issues that are common to most of these standards. And we're going to start today with stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement is a key part of most sustainability standards, and also increasingly it's becoming part of a requirement in certain legislations. But it's generally speaking something that's not done very well, and even the standards themselves aren't particularly good at giving you guidance how to do it. So in this bite we're going to give you some key insights about stakeholder engagement, so stay to the end, and we'll also be able to point you towards more information so you can handle this job better. For many managers and businesses, stakeholder engagement is counterintuitive. People can't see why they'd want to be talking to people, especially people who don't like their company. But ask yourself this: how much valuable management time do you spend on complaints and disputes, or even political interference? Stakeholder engagement done properly is a tool that can help you manage these business risks. For stakeholder engagement, the basics of this: a documented and methodical approach, adequate information given to all stakeholders are given an opportunity to give input, and you must not leave anyone out for no reason. As I've said before, there's often no real guidance on who you need to talk to and who really counts, and even the standards themselves aren't particularly good at giving guidance. Now, I want to introduce an important concept here called the interested and affected parties concept. This is how you deal with who you should be talking to in certain circumstances and who you need to talk to in others, and how you deal with them. As a company, you are always the affected party. You've got to identify when you're talking to another affected party. Let's say you're a forestry company, for example, and you're going to do some harvesting activities or some spraying activities, and you inform your neighbours. They are definitely affected parties, and so you deal with them in a certain way and at a level of detail that befits their status as an affected party. Other people are interested parties. They're interested in what you're doing, but you wouldn't necessarily treat them the same way as you would an affected party. Local and national NGOs, etc., you can keep them informed about sort of things that you're doing, but they're not necessarily an affected party. One slight variation to this is regulatory authorities, regulatory bodies. For example, people who are granting you permits. Are they an affected party or is an interested party? I would tend to suggest that if you are reporting them for regulated reasons, like reporting on permits and licenses, you treat them as an affected party, but for all other things, you might treat them as an interested party. And so now we've got an important concept, which is we've identified who the stakeholders are, whether they're interested and affected, and in what circumstances we speak to them and about what. The most important thing now is to capture that in a database and to add to that all the time, because sometimes contacts will change, or people's interests will change, or you'll identify new stakeholders. So the most important thing is to run a database that'll tell you how to run stakeholder engagement on a case-by-case basis. Another key issue is appropriate methods of contacting people. So, for example, we're in a modern age, maybe we're in a Western country. You may think, I'm going to send everybody an email. That may not necessarily be the appropriate way to do it in all circumstances. You're assuming people have computers. Another one is to consider things like English as a foreign language, or literacy rates when you're dealing in an English-speaking country, of course, and also targeting people in groups. If you're dealing with certain cultural groups as well, face-to-face is the only way to go, and so you would pick that as a culturally appropriate way to correspond with people. Also, in certain cultures as well, large meetings or local meetings as well are a better way than contacting people by emails. You will be expected to have identified an appropriate method to get the message across, appropriate to the target audience and their ability to participate. And also you will be expected to have taken into account cultural issues. Now let's look at some of the issues and challenges you face with stakeholder consultation. And the first one is non-participation. Generally speaking, there could be several reasons for non-participation. It is vitally important that you identify the reason for non-participation and try and work around it. So, for example, in the first instance, people might not have the ability or the facilities to communicate with you. And therefore, what do? Do you bring the message to them? Do you meet them in the community if they don't have the ability or the resources to respond to what you're doing? They may not even have the technical capabilities. If it's a particularly technical issue, then you might be expected to facilitate some form of meeting that could help them take part and get over their inability to participate. Another and completely different reason for non-participation is what I call strategic non-participation. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's quite a vexing issue. You may have a group of people or an organisation that simply don't want to talk to you, because if they feel that they're talking to you, that they will be giving you some sort of approval for your approach, and that they have other wider disputes with you, and therefore they will not talk to you. Sometimes they have the mistaken ability that by not talking to you, you can't reach a consensus or can't show stakeholder engagement, and therefore will not be able to gain sustainability certification. That is not the case. The key to it is to keep records of all of your efforts to communicate. And there's no real answer to this problem, but most important is you have to show that you've made an effort, that you've tried everything to try and get over strategic non-participation. One important trick would be to try and work through an agreed proxy. So you might be able to get someone like me, for example, who might go in and talk to you on the basis that you're talking to me, I'm relaying the message, but it doesn't imply that you're talking to a group of people that you don't want to be seen to be giving approval to. That's another good way of doing it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Another problem in stakeholder engagement is completely the opposite to non-participation. It's what's called stakeholder fatigue. As I've said before, sometimes the standards aren't particularly good at telling you how to deal with stakeholder consultation. And so the auditor would expect you to, on a certain point, when you'll say you're having a new farming operation or you're opening up a new business, to have a stakeholder campaign. And that might be appropriate, but it also often leads to the point where there's an expectation you'll maybe do this every year by rolling out the campaign every year. That leads to what's called stakeholder fatigue. There wasn't an issue the first time, and there isn't an issue now. Why are you talking to us? And it's often very difficult to get around that issue. Two recommendations here is that one, you should keep your stakeholder engagement from previous years and add to it as an iterative process to say, well, we had these comments from these people last time, they didn't want to comment this time, but maybe it's because they feel that there's nothing more to say. So build up the comments iteratively, year by year, so that you can demonstrate that these people have spoken to you before and maybe they're just fatigued or have nothing more to say. Where I sometimes get in disputes with auditors who are doing sustainability certification is that they expect, because it's December and you're planning your management strategies, that you should be out there consulting by rote on a year-by-year basis. My recommendation to you is to develop stakeholder engagement as an ongoing process that happens all the time, not a specific campaign. And by doing that, it can be more sensitive, and it can work in with things like your social impact strategies and your environmental impact strategies. And it's not something that you do where you put effort into a campaign and nobody responds. I'm therefore suggesting that you look at stakeholder engagement as an ongoing activity that's preemptive, part of a planned approach. It can involve fact gathering, third-party fact gathering, and can be measured for its effectiveness. Now, in future Bytes, we'll be talking about this process of ongoing stakeholder engagement. We'll be dealing with it in stakeholder mapping. We'll be talking about it when we talk about social impact assessments, and we'll be talking about it when we talk about disputes handling. And so look at those talks that are coming up and just see how it all fits together. At this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about Indigenous engagement. More often than not, Indigenous engagement is an expectation, a specific expectation of many sustainability standards. The problem is to identify those people who are properly mandated to talk on behalf of Indigenous people. And also another problem is to have a culturally appropriate methodology of dealing with those people. Now, this is a topic all in itself, and sometimes I feel I'm not quite qualified in it. So what I will always do is I will take advice, or in other words, I will engage on how to engage with appropriate cultural experts. And if you're going to do cultural stakeholder engagement, that is my recommendation. Engage on how to engage. Get it right. One of the common mistakes of stakeholder engagement is that the companies, after their engagement, don't close the loop. In other words, they don't feed back to the stakeholders on the outcome of their inputs, for example. It's important that you give feedback to stakeholders and tell them how their feedback was taken into consideration. This does not mean that you always have to do what they say. So, give you an example. You may have a situation of truck movements in a rural area and it's going to cause dust. And you've engaged with stakeholders and they said, why don't you just tarmac the roads and that'll get rid of the dust problem? The answer is, well, look, that's going to be prohibitively expensive, but we can use water tankers to keep the dust down. How's that? Or they might say, well, we've noticed in your forest areas or in some of the remote bush where we know there to be sensitive or maybe rare, threatened, endangered species, that people often go in on mountain bikes and trespass. And you might say, well, that's very good feedback. We need to look at our security. That's important, and thank you very much. So it's important to take into consideration what they say, and where you can, where it's important, act on it, because sometimes it's gold. What they're telling you is really, really important, and it really does add value to your sustainability system. Finally, and the most important thing is, and I come from a quality assurance point of view, and in quality assurance we say, if it moves, train it. If it doesn't move, calibrate it. And if it's not written down, it didn't happen. Most important point with your sustainability strategy, write down everything. Keep records. And as I said before, my recommendation is you have an ongoing sustainability approach throughout your day-to-day business as usual, but it has to involve records. At this point, I'd encourage you to get in touch with us on the contacts that are now in front of you on your screen. And we can help you with certain aspects of your sustainability approach. I've actually written an ebook on it. That's on my website, which is down here. You can see that website address. Go and have a look at that. But also we can help you with other things. So as consultants, we can help you develop the key elements of your stakeholder engagement process and work out what's important and what's not. We can help you identify stakeholders, especially where those stakeholders may be reluctant to talk to you. We can actually help you carry out the process by doing the stakeholder engagement for you. Sometimes by a third-party approach, it might work better than seeing the company do it, especially if there's non-participation involved. We can help you develop a documented approach that meets sustainability standards and their requirements of stakeholder engagement, and we can help you with the key recommendation, which is to incorporate it in your business as usual. This is only a very small fly over the target on sustainability. If you want to do more with it, come and talk to us and we can certainly help you out. Finally, what I'd like to do is, if you've liked this video, press like. Please share it with people so we can get the conversation about stakeholder engagement. If you've got any comments, please put comments down, especially things that you might want to hear about that we can do future bites on. What about this? What about that? So thank you for coming along. We hope you enjoyed these sustainability bites, and we'll join us again for another.